On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, the United States and the United Kingdom hit the Houthis. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So on January 11th, 2024, the United States forces with both surface vessels, submarine, probably the guided ballistic missile submarine of Florida, aircraft off the deck of the USS Dwight Eisenhower, about 15 F-18 Hornets, 4 Eurofighters from the Royal Air Force staging out of Cyprus, all hit targets in and around Western Yemen, targeting the Houthis' ability to not just launch strikes against shipping in the Red Sea, but also their ability to assemble the drones and command and control and all the usual things that you would do in a strike like this, a purely retaliatory strike against the Houthi. We're going to discuss that strike, but more importantly, we're going to talk about the impact this is going to have on global shipping. A lot of great channels out there are going to be talking about the military sites about this. I recommend head on over to Subbrief, go on over to Ward Carroll. They will be doing a lot on the military side. I want to talk more about the impact this is going to have on the commercial side. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. So what does it take to get the United States and the United Kingdom to bomb you? Well, it seems like 27 attacks is the magic number. On 11 January, the Houthi initiated their 27th attack against shipping in and around the Red Sea. This is the report from U.S. Central Command that the Houthis fired an anti-ship ballistic missile at the ships in and around the region. However, I don't really think it's the 27th attack that did it. I think there's two issues at play here. Number one, the Security Council of the United Nations strongly condemned the Houthi attacks on the Red Sea on 10 January. I believe that was one of the issues. It gives cover to the United States and the United Kingdom to launch these attacks against the Houthi. And then the second was a series of attacks on January 9th against 4 American ships. Got a video, I'll have the link right above for you. You can go ahead and take a look at it where I talk about this and more. But 4 ships, the Maersk Atlanta, the Green Bay, the Liberty Glory, and the Alliance Norfolk all sailed through the area on January 9th. And I have heard from multiple merchant mariners on vessels, these 4 and other vessels that were in and around the area. I should note that I contacted the shipping firms, the owning companies, operating companies for all 4 of these vessels. I contacted Maersk Line Limited, I contacted Liberty, and I contacted Waterman Steamship. Maersk Lines directed me to Maersk Company in Denmark for any comments. Liberty had no comments, and I haven't heard back from Waterman Steamship. Can I be clear to the operating companies watching this right now? Because I know you watch this. It's good press. Don't shy away from good press. Highlight the fact that American merchant mariners are at risk here, that they're performing jobs essential. Liberty Glory is delivering food aid. That's a pretty good story. The other vessels are delivering cargo, not just commercially, but also for the Department of Defense. This is good stories. And let's be clear what happened on January 9th. Let me summarize from the multitude of emails and texts and WhatsApps and everything else I received from everyone. Overall consensus is 3 things. Number one, it was a shit show. And when I say that, I don't mean to be derogatory. I mean to say that it was insane. It was crazy what was happening out there. That commercial ships experienced for 3 hours a set of battles with an intensity of 30 minutes right when they were getting off the port of Mocha, heading in the very southern end of the Red Sea, that it really got intense. Number 2, that these ships were nearly hit. There were a lot of near misses. And again, drones, missiles being shot down. There were a lot of close aboard events that could have gone the other way. And the third thing, overwhelmingly from the merchant mariners, I want to be 100% clear about this. The crews on board the 3 U.S. Arleigh Burke destroyers, the Laboon, the Mason, and the Gravely, and the Royal Navy's HMS Diamond, all of them, all the merchant mariners in entirety sat there and said that the Navy saved their asses. And I don't mean to be graphic here, but these are the phrases that are being used by the merchant mariners to tell me this. I want to convey it to you. The Navy did an outstanding job in defending the ships. No one got hit. 21 missiles and drones came flying at them, and every last one of them were intercepted and not hitting the ships. I think that says a lot about what happened on that night. But I do think it was the combination of attacks, not just on commercial vessels, but on 4 U.S. vessels sailing through the area, and then the Security Council resolution that got this to happen. So here's a story over in GCAPTAIN by Bloomberg. I'll have links to all these so you can go more in depth if you want to take a look at it. A report out by U.S. Central Command's Air Force Component Commander noted that they hit about 60 Houthi targets in and around the area using both aircraft, ship-launched, and sub-launched cruise missiles. So a very extensive strike. This is the statement by President Biden out after this. He talked about the fact that the UK and the US did the strikes with support from Australia, Bahrain, Canada, Netherlands. We're not sure what that means exactly. We're not sure if Air Force units staged out of the areas, if there were support elements in it. I just want to say, go read this one line, or there's one section right here. These strikes are in direct support to unprecedented Houthi attacks against international maritime vessels in the Red Sea, including the use of anti-ship ballistic missiles for the first time in history. These attacks have endangered U.S. personnel, civilian mariners, merchant mariners, both U.S. and foreign, and our partners jeopardized trade and threatened the freedom of navigation. More than 50 nations have been affected in 27 attacks on international commercial shipping. Again, I've asked CENTCOM to break down those 27 attacks, but they don't. Fortunately, the EU has got that great grid that I'll use here and show you of the number of attacks that take place. Crews from more than 20 countries have been threatened or taken hostage in this acts of piracy. I was a little surprised that there wasn't an effort to try to get Galaxy Leader back from being held. More than 2,000 ships have been forced to divert thousands of miles, which can cause weeks. On January 9th, Houthis launched their largest attack to date, directly targeting American ships. Why are we not talking about this more? This is an attack on American shipping. Understand, attacking an American shipping leads to wars in our history. We've seen these happen. The quasi-war against France, the War of 1812, the blowing up of the Maine in Havana Harbor. World War I is the classic example. I got a whole video I'm going to be doing on the analogy of World War I and unrestricted submarine warfare to this. But very clearly, the attacks on U.S. shipping is one of the things that is provoking this. So let's take a minute and go to our friends at Marine Traffic. This is the chart of the world showing cargo ships in green. These are container ships, bulkers, and tankers in red. These are everything over 10,000 gross tons, so fairly significant vessels. Note the cluster heading out of Asia here, going back and forth, taking that route around South Africa, substantially larger, and I'm going to show you numbers here. But also notice that the route through this region of contention, and again, the fight last night was right here along the western coast of Yemen, and the fight on January 9th was basically right here at the very southern end of the Red Sea, through the Bab el-Mandab and out here into the Gulf of Aden, that we still see ships transiting this area. However, when you zoom back out and take a look at container ships, here we are just cleaned up with just container ships. Notice the vast majority of them are still heading around Africa, and literally the southern Red Sea is devoid of them. You'll see ships going in and out of Jeddah and some of the western Saudi Arabian ports. There are a few vessels, CMA CGM, and a few other container ships that will make the passage through. For example, Flying Fish 1 is heading through right now with an armed guard on board. You see some vessels heading down, but almost all that traffic has now been diverted. And the question becomes, do the strikes against Yemen now open up the Red Sea, or are we looking at a new level of problems? So I'm going to take you over to this. This is the International Monetary Fund's Portwatch. This is a new development they're using. I've used this in a couple of videos in the past. Some of those charts that I've used from Jim Bianco are based on this data. They are just rolling this out. It's actually a beta version of this. But they're looking at trade disruptions around planet, and in particular, they're looking here in the Red Sea. Looking at the Suez Canal, the fact that 11% of global trade comes through this area. We're talking about petroleum, we're talking about chemical, non-metallic mineral products, and of course, finished goods coming through the area. If you get into the area in particularly here, when we start looking at this, about 19,000 transits go through this region annually. And when you start zooming down here to detail, first of all, these charts are great. This shows you 3 months. So this goes back to the beginning of October, right when the situation started between Israel and Hamas. And in Palestine, you'll notice right here that the 7-day average for ships going through the Bab el Mandeb, the Gate of Tears, is about 78 ships. And it stays pretty consistent here as you go in. But then when you have the Houthi initiate their decide to both attack ships going ships that are owned or are flagged by Israel, but then to attack ships that are connected to Israel, you see the precipitous drop starting here around 18 December. And so you're going at 18 December from about 72 ships. And then if you drop all the way down here to the latest number, which is 8 January, in the prior year, you had 77 ships. Now you're down to a total of 45 ships. So you have a significant drop of 22 ships there. And you'll see about evenly split there between cargo ships. So Suez Canal, you were averaging about 70 vessels in the 70s, pretty typically. And then all of a sudden you see that precipitous drop here where they begin to fall. And now on January 8th, you're looking at 53 ships going through the Suez Canal as compared to 72. When you lose 20 ships at $500,000 a passage, that gets to be significant really fast. That's $10 million a day that Egypt is losing. And if this continues, if you see this continued drop of about a third of the ships going through, Egypt makes about $9 billion a year from the Suez Canal. They are set to lose between $2 to $3 billion over the course of a year if this happens. What's the impact elsewhere around the world? Well, that's the Cape of Good Hope. That's the southern tip of Africa. Go here and look at how many ships are rounding the Cape of Good Hope. You get an average of about 40 to 50, which seems to be a fairly average number coming around. Most of them are cargo ships. These are largely bulk carriers. These are the big open hull cargo holds that carry grain and ore through. Very few tankers going through, pretty minimal. But then again, you come to 18 December, that kind of inflection point, and that number begins to increase, and we go from 50 up into 72, with the number of tankers jumping up to 19 and the number of cargo ships to 58. So we're seeing tankers start to divert, and we're seeing those container ships coming around. What does that mean economically? Let's go to Drewry's. Drewry's is that analytical company that does looks at containers. This is their World Container Index. This takes all the rates from around the world and puts it together into a composite. And you'll notice that prior to this happening, let's go all the way back here to September, early October, the Drewry Index was at $1,390. When we initially saw the attacks begin to ramp up in November, it was $1,500. And now the latest, as of 11 January, $3,072. Now, this is an index. This doesn't really reflect any specific route. Let's go to specific routes. Here is the routes for 4 of them. The Shanghai to Rotterdam route. Shanghai to Rotterdam was sitting at about $1,000. So $1,000 you can ship a container from Shanghai to Rotterdam. Now it's at $4,406, a 400% increase. Let's jump to Shanghai to Genoa. Shanghai to Genoa, a little bit more. You're looking at about $1,300 to $1,500 because, again, usually you have to get containers sorted in a large port and get it in. So right there around $1,300, $1,400. It's up over $5,200 right now. If we go Shanghai to Los Angeles, probably right around $2,000 we're looking at just before this all started. And now Shanghai to Los Angeles, $2,790. We're seeing container liners deciding to start shifting their containers into the West Coast. Remember, we got low water on the Panama Canal, 2/3 capability to go through. Can't use that big lane as much to move containers from Asia to the East and Gulf Coast. So the container liners started sending them to the Suez. Well, the Houthi had something to say about that. And now we're seeing them return. Expect to see that rate continue to rise. And then the last here, the Shanghai to New York. Again, we tend to forget about 30% of the containers that are heading from Asia to Europe are going on to the United States. And you'll see that route has been a little bit higher, a little bit more flux going on here because of what's happening. You had this little jump up here mainly because of what was happening in the Panama Canal. So you're going between 2,500 and 3,500. So let's say 3,000 is roughly the average on Shanghai to New York. and now we see it around 4,170. Expect to see that one also increase as we go on. So definitely going to start feeling that in higher freight rates, which means higher prices for consumers and shippers. So, who's benefiting from the Houthi attacks? Well, obviously, the Houthis are benefiting from it because they want to try to make a stand on a political effort. They may change their opinion now after being struck by the United States and the United Kingdom. But we definitely see that the shipping companies are benefiting from this because stocks surged as word came out about the strikes. Hapag-Lloyd was up 4.8%, Maersk gained 3.9%, Frontline, a oil company, energy company, 5%, and we're seeing Zim up as much as 5.8%. Meanwhile, ships are being warned to avoid the Red Sea after airstrikes, as I showed you before. That's not happening. You still have vessels transiting the area in pretty large numbers. What we are seeing, however, is the growth of the number of ships who are identifying themselves as Chinese crew on board, Chinese owned, a lot of links to China. And there's a perception here growing that maybe connections to China will save you because there's a lot of belief that China behind the scenes is exerting a lot of influence on the Houthi. Let me be clear. There was stories about the fact that there were elements trying to sway the Houthis. There was a story about the container lines bribing the Houthis. I don't think you can bribe the Houthis with money. However, I do think you can bribe the Iranians who are backing the Houthi. And I think that's where their pressure point is. It's not so much the Houthi, it is the backers of the Houthi. And then we're going to see how that play out. But ships are being warned to avoid the Red Sea after airstrikes. Remember, the idea here is to open the Red Sea, not to make more problems. And that's the big question. Does the strikes make it more dangerous? Are we going to see the shipping companies and more importantly, the insurance companies sit there and say, listen, this is too dangerous to go through. You have to go around. And therefore, was the strikes military successful? Probably so. I think the US and the UK probably are very good at striking things militarily. However, is it economically successful? Because if more ships have to start bypassing this area, was this the right choice? Makes you feel good, but is it the right choice economically? Because what we're seeing here is something completely different. Oil tankers are avoiding the Red Sea after the US and the UK strike. We're seeing more and more oil tankers, at least 4 have diverted from the Red Sea since the strikes, and we're going to start seeing more go around. Oil prices were up $3 a barrel or more than 4%, with Brent trading above $80 a barrel. And again, whereas containers have the capacity, they have extra ships, they have much bigger ships, they can absorb more containers on the ships, they can put more ships on the route. Oil tankers can't. There is a shortage of oil tankers. Matter of fact, one of the things that we've seen happen because of Russia-Ukraine war is a lot of older oil tankers have been kept running well past where they should be to take part in the dark fleet. These are the ships that are trading Russian oil and doing it kind of outside the mainstream of the traditional shipping patterns and outside the norm of shipping agencies for insurance and for regulatory purposes. So this is going to have not just this element impact, but environmental. Ships are burning a lot more fuel, a lot more carbon is being dumped into the atmosphere because of these longer routes. The EU just imposed a carbon tax on ships. The IMO, the International Maritime Organization, is regulating the amount of carbon emissions from vessels. This has, I can't even tell you the number of downfall effects. And like things aren't crazy enough on this story, Iran seizes a oil tanker the other day. And can I be clear? This is not a surprise. If anyone's surprised by this, you are not paying attention to what is happening. This tanker, the St. Nicholas, is, first of all, it's not the St. Nicholas. It's the Suez Rajan. This is the tanker that the United States didn't seize, but basically went into Empire Shipping, a Greek firm, and leveraged them through the Greek government to have that oil tanker disappear, turn off its AIS, and sail halfway around the world from the Indian Ocean to Houston, Texas, and offload its oil because the oil was deemed as sanctioned oil by the United States. It was Iranian oil. The ship sat at Houston for months because no one wanted to touch this tanker for fear that it was going to get retaliation by the Iranians. The U.S. finally managed to get it offloaded. They returned the vessel back to Empire. They, of course, renamed it because that will mask it. No, ships' names change all the time. You can't change the IMO numbers, the identification numbers. And when this ship sailed past Iran heading to Iraq, they let it go because they were waiting for it to get fuel on board. And as soon as it loaded fuel, and it doesn't matter whose fuel it is, it's Turkish fuel. But as soon as they loaded the fuel on board, as it was sailing out of the Straits of Hormuz, the Iranians seized it. This is the track of the St. Nicholas sailing into the Persian Gulf and then on the way back out. And you'll notice right here off the coast of Oman, it was seized. More than likely, what's going to happen, the oil will be offloaded and they'll release the vessel. It doesn't matter whose oil it is in the eyes of the Iranians. The fact that this ship gave up Iranian oil, they're going to get oil back. It reminds me of the scene from The Jerk when they're trying to shoot Steve Martin and he thinks they're shooting the cans. He hates these cans. Iran hates this oil and they're going to get the oil back. And this creates a whole other problem that exists. So a lot going on. The strikes in context, you'll get a lot of information. Again, recommend head on over to Ward Carroll's channel, go over to Subbrief. They'll be talking about the military side a lot more than I do. But on the economic side, the question I have right now is what happens with shipping at this point? A big question about what the next thing happens to it. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You give it a big thumbs up. You can hit that super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon, become a monthly, yearly subscriber for the channel. This is what allows me to keep this channel up and running. Until our next video or next time we bomb the Houthi, which may be any day now, this is Sal signing off. And remember, 4 U.S. merchant ships and their crews were attacked, along with scores of other commercial vessels from other nations. Over 2,000 ships sailed through this area. How about you give a nice little hand to those merchant mariners who are keeping the world's economy flowing? Until the next episode, Sal, signing off.